or switch to silent. And I welcome Senator Susan McDonald and Senator Gerrit Rennick on teleconference. And I now welcome representatives from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications. Now for the Hansard record, if you could please give your name and state the capacity in which you appear today.
Thanks, Senator. Christine Dacey, Deputy Secretary, Transport Group.
Thank you.
Janet Quigley, First Assistant Secretary, Domestic Aviation and Reform Division.
And Richard Wood, First Assistant Secretary, International Aviation Technology and Services in the Transport Group.
And Oliver Richards, Assistant Secretary, Aviation.
And as I said, we are joined by Senators McDonald and Senator Rennick. I do thank you, Senators, for dialling in under the COVID conditions. And Senator Sheldon. So I will give you, Ms Dacey, or any of your officers, the opportunity to make an opening statement before we go to questions.
No opening statement, Senator.
Okay, wonderful. Senator Sheldon.
Good, thanks very much. I'd just like to, first of all, thank you for coming along this morning, but also thank you for all the hard work you're doing, because obviously this has been a very, very challenging time. There's a lot of call on both your ability and your skill, and a lot of hard work going in. Trying to coordinate all that through various COVID periods and lockdowns and etc. must be extremely difficult. It's outside, I think, anyone's experience in this room, and you've managed to hang in there and do some very vital work. So I'd like to thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator. I'll take it.
It's not estimates. Grab everyone you can.
Now, the Department has provided a range of essential support packages, obviously, to the aviation sector during COVID-19. Of course, they've been extremely important in making sure that we keep some jobs and we keep some planes operating in the air. What do you think the aviation sector would look like right now without that support taking place over the last period?
I mean, there was a time last April when literally Qantas and Virgin and Rex came to us and said there will be no planes flying, full stop. The international border shut sort of early March, and so the international impact was, pretty immediate. It didn't shut. I've got to be really careful. People talk about the international border being shut. It's just entirely restricted by virtue of the quarantine and the caps. So the international traffic had fallen away to basically zero. I think the number we generally talk about is 98%, 99% out of the international space. And then it was actually Good Friday last year when the airlines notified us that they were going to stop flying domestically. There was that much uncertainty and chaos in the system. Now, whether that would have persisted long term, I don't know, but I think what we have seen through the work that we have done in the last 12 months is that without things like RANs and DANs and the minimum connectivity, we would have had precious little activity. That's my guess.
And so essentially that, we would have seen the industry grind to a halt without that support. Obviously, the impact on regional communities as well would have been dramatic. Medical transport, bushfire relief, all those things would have been affected.
I think that's right, and the pandemic's gone through a lot of different phases. So there was that initial, very broad-ranging lockdown and stay-at-home orders, and I think you would have seen basically no activity anywhere, even between, the so-called Golden Triangle. And then the country sort of looked like in about May that it was coming out of the worst of that, initial response. And so we were starting to see some green shoots of domestic recovery. And then the Victorian second wave happened, and then you just started to see the whole next phase of the crisis, which absolutely contracted activity back again. And then when Victoria came out of that, we started to see what I describe as the next kind of phase, which is there was, again, a sense of optimism. And then we kind of got hit with a series of clusters and outbreaks that translated into hard lockdowns, domestic border closures, which again dented confidence and saw a contraction in activity. We're able to track very clearly through our programs that every time there's a border closure or an announcement, bookings drop, refunds go up, And so we can track a very close linear correlation to all of those things. And, that's very difficult for the airlines to manage. They're constantly trying to guess where the public health is going, and so that they can respond operationally. And we're in that conversation with them. As you know, there are discussions at National Cabinet and through AHPPC just constantly. But operationally, it is very difficult for the airlines and the airport operators and the sector as a whole. It's the volatility and never knowing. And we've had a couple of false starts where we think we're on a trajectory to recovery. And until we get an enduring domestic bubble, people talk about international bubbles, and that's all fine and well, and that'll happen, vaccine dependent. But until we get an enduring domestic bubble, I think this sector is in real strife. And the way we have designed the programs is that they taper on and off so that we can kind of flex with the system as best we can.
Get our own backyard in order first, eh?
Yeah, it's hard.
In the course of the hearings, we've heard from a number of airlines, Virgin, Qantas, Rex, certainly heard from ground handling companies, airports, worker representatives, everybody from, and heard from workers themselves directly, from cleaners to flight crew to catering staff. The general sentiment has been that a full recovery of domestic aviation remains still some distance away. And of course, international aviation remains a distant hope. So in line with that, what does the department view as the next steps for the sector?
I think it's so that enduring domestic bubble that I call it, I think is so inextricably linked with vaccine rollout to the most vulnerable. And getting, frankly, the premiers to a position where they feel like they can adjust their public health responses, right? So at the moment, and I'm not criticising anyone, that's not my job, but the public health response has been go to hard lockdown, pull up your border. What we are hoping to see is that, particularly with the rollout of the vaccine to the most vulnerable in the community and the border workers, that we will see a new level of stability. Now, the timing of that is 6 to 8 weeks for the most vulnerable groups. And we are hoping that gives the decision makers and the travelling public a sense of confidence that they can get on a plane, go somewhere, conduct their business, visit their friends and family that they haven't seen in, the best part of a year, go and have a holiday. So we are very conscious that the next, I think, 4 to 8 weeks are entirely critical.
Can I just clarify something, please, Michelle? So you say the most vulnerable, Ms Stacey, you're talking about the frontline workers and the aged care?
Yeah.
Are you taking into consideration that great cohort of the population who have underlying issues who aren't frontline workers? Is that part of the 6 to 8 week vaccination hope that we have?
And so, Senator, just to be entirely clear for the record, I am not the Department of Health, and I am...
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But you are referring to...
Yes, I think that's right. I think in the general parlance, we talk about vulnerable people who've got comorbidity, who've got underlying health issues. So,
Okay.
And please don't hold me to those because
we wouldn't do it too, don't
I'm
worry.
I'm not rolling out the vaccine, but I'm hanging on every word
Maybe you
for
should.
it.
Would be done by now, the way you go, the way this department operates.
Yeah, so we are very, very hopeful. But, we've been hopeful before, and I think you have to be a realist about this is a very tricky virus, and we've thought a couple of times before that we might be at least headed in the right direction out of the woods. But I do think the vaccine is the fundamental game changer here. Yes, for everyone.
So I might just quickly run through a few dates. So when did the Regional Airlines Funding Assistance Program, when did it end?
When's it slated to end?
Yep.
Ms. Quigley?
28th, sorry, Janet Quigley, 28th of March.
No, RAT.
We're talking RANs.
Yeah.
Yes, RANs.
28th of
RAFA,
March.
sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
RAFA
RAFA
ended 31st of December.
That's right.
Yeah, it was around the 31st of December, yep.
It was on the 31st, and because claims had stopped being made by all of the eligible carriers.
When did the Australian Airline financial relief package end?
Same day. One of the measures that was included underneath it has continued.
And when does that continue on to, that measure underneath it?
Mr Wood?
Through to the 31st of March this year.
Yep. When does the Domestic Aviation Network Support, or the DANS program end?
That's the 28th of March this year.
Yep. When does the Airline Support program end? Regional Airlines, sorry.
RANS.
Regional
RANS,
RANS.
28th of March also.
Yep. Now, I realise that this is not a program administered by your department, but you would be aware that the JobKeeper program also ends on the 28th of March.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
So from the 29th of March 2021 at the stage, if I'm correcting it, that none of these five program packages which we've been put in place will keep aviation companies and workers afloat will be in place. What's the plan?
So, Senator, all I can say without preempting any decisions of government is that we're well aware that the sector will not be fully recovered on the 29th of March and that conversations remain ongoing.
There's also it's been established that the sector remains in critical care. We've got Rex saying these hearings that they'll have to cut off regional towns when RANS ends. We've got regional airports saying that they have enough cash reserves to operate for another 6 months. And we've got companies like Virgin, of course, warning of mass layoffs once JobKeeper ends, and of course Qantas adding their voice to that likelihood. This is all happening in 3.5 weeks. So what does the department have to say about what the plan is?
So, as I indicated before, these are fundamentally matters for the government. We are certainly well aware there is no sense that we are asleep at the wheel and don't fully understand that this sector will not be fully recovered. Ms Quigley might be able to take you through some of the work we've done around our 5-year plan, but in a program sense. JobKeeper is obviously a matter for our Treasury colleagues, who I think are appearing after us, but we have a very clear eye towards what our current program support offers, and the fact that turning off the tap and facing a cliff is, something that the sector would be unprepared for.
So before you do that, sorry. So Qantas, I think it was Qantas said yesterday, Senator Sheldon, that they're in constant weekly, almost daily conversations with the government. I don't know if they said the Treasurer or the government. Is this department part of those conversations as well?
Yes, we talk to Qantas and the airlines frequently.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So what my concern is it's 3.5 weeks away. That is not a very long time for companies to be able to, and the workforce, to be able to prepare itself for what the future program is. A number of workers have given evidence, and their organisations separately with them have given evidence that workers have been called back to work after working somewhere else, receiving no income, coming back to then ultimately finding a casual employment somewhere, and sometimes steady casual employment. I'm reluctant to call it permanent casual, but steady casual employment, and then coming back and only finding they're getting a week or a couple of weeks' work and then being laid off again. People making a decision to stay within the industry, and that critical knowledge, capacity, ability, skills is essential. 3.5 weeks is not a lot of time to be reorganising your life once again. When do we expect a program to be coming forward?
Senator, I can't speak to what decisions will be made and the timing of them. What I can say to you is we are acutely conscious of the impact that this has had on the workers in the sector. And those sort of stories that you were just relaying then about, having to make terrible choices about, I've kind of got a level of steady income over here, but I'm committed to this sector, and that not going well, that harks back to the conversation I was having with you initially about it has been start-stop. And the hope is that the vaccine and stable domestic borders will lead to a much more enduring recovery trajectory. And in a general sense, we know that people working in the sector are really passionate about it. People love planes, they love the smell of avgas, they want to stay in the sector. And we're also highly conscious of the fact that there are, because of the nature of these roles, you know, genuine safety and skilling and latency and currency requirements. And so that we do have that firmly in our minds in terms of the timing and some of the issues that we are working through very carefully with them. So I realise that answer might not give you everything you need, but all of those things are part of our current consideration.
Yeah, I think, Ms. Stacey, you rightly said earlier that, you know, there's been false starts, there's been, the need for flexibility because of the tap being turned on and turned off.
Yeah.
Trying to make decisions in that environment means that the ones that can make a decision is the policy decisions that we make, so that people have some certainty within these uncertain times about how they can actually perform their business. And I just raised, Mildura Airport has warned that there's 6 to 12 months before cash reserves have been depleted. Is there consideration been given to the effect on airports themselves? The airports have been raising serious concern about the lack of support, whilst identifying support that has been given, but the comparative lack of support that airlines have been receiving in comparison with them.
Senator, I can't go into the specifics. What I can say to you is that the airports, particularly through the AAA, through ALGA, and indeed through the larger, leased airports, have been very forthright in their views with us and with government about what they consider would be the right sort of support for them. We have taken, and I don't think I'm saying anything that is a surprise here, we have taken the view that airline activity generates broader activity in the sector. It creates that multiplier effect. People can criticise that policy design from their own perspective, and they're perfectly entitled to, but that has been the primary focus for a period of time.
I think I just want to ask you a bit more on that point. The airports have raised their concerns, and I'm particularly going to the what the comments from Mildura. Obviously, various airports are going to be in various unique circumstances. We're very mindful the local government aviation hasn't received support, and is there hope that that's their considerations and their pressures that they're under are going to be addressed?
I'll get Ms Quigley to talk a little bit about the consultations we've done through the 5-year plan. I would just note Mildura, I don't claim to be an expert on Mildura, but all of the economic indicators are that organisations in Victoria were particularly hard hit because of the length of that second wave lockdown. And I assume that, Mildura Airport falls into that category. And we are incredibly aware of the airport's stance, and there's a policy design issue here. So Mrs Quigley can just take you, if you would like, through some of the consultations we've done on the 5-year plan that we're working towards.
So we've started a process of consultation to support the 5-year plan. It was a commitment the government made last year to develop the plan, which describes support that will be offered from 2021 into the future. So we released the issues paper in October last year. It was meant to provide an opportunity for the sector to provide views on a range of different policy options. We got 68 written submissions and they've all been put on our website. We had additional virtual consultations with over 70 organisations. And then we've also got our expert panel, which is led by Professor Patrick Murray, and he has 3 colleagues who all come from the sector and bring various range of expertise and knowledge. So we've had the opportunity to expand on issues and concerns from all of those different stakeholders. They've come into the department to be analysed, and we're developing the plan which we'll be able to provide advice to government on shortly. And we're working hard to be able to meet the timelines which the government outlined in terms of delivering a plan in the first half of this year.
And I think importantly, the plan recognises that we've gone from, what we were calling the crisis phase through basically most of 2020. And we are trying to pivot with the sector in our policy and program responses to recovery. We know that that will be a pretty bumpy ride. And we also understand that there will be life after COVID, right? And what does the sector look like 12, 24, 36 months after COVID? And, there will be some changes in the sector. There, I think you would be naive to assume that it will look like it did in, December 2019. What the shape of that looks like is the kind of X factor. But what we don't want, and through things like some of the support programs we put in place, we were attempting to get everyone through to the other side and to not distort the market unnecessarily, noting that we had a case of market failure through no one's fault, through the health responses. So there are no easy solutions here.
So we just on this point, the 2021 onwards plan, when do you expect that to be delivered to government, and has there been an indication on how long they'll deliberate on that plan?
They've made this commitment to deliver it in the first half of this year. We're preparing the advice now and the plan, and that will be formulated in the in the next coming weeks to month, and then that will be provided to government to consider and take forward as they see fit.
So I'm mindful that often plans might be delivered by the department on time, but aren't delivered necessarily. The government gives further consideration. And so that once the plan's released, then there's a discussion normally takes place, and sometimes even refinement. So we're looking at later in the year, early next year potentially, before there's actually a plan that's being implemented. What's the modelling you have for if everything was cut off on all those dates we went through before in assistance, and for the next 6 months, what is the 9 months? What does aviation look like if we don't have schemes continuing on?
So, Senator, I feel duty bound to say I don't think the plan will come out in next year. I think it will come out in a much more timely way than that. I accept the point you're making generally that I'm not in control of all aspects of that. And I would also make the point that there are kind of two tracks of activity happening, right, which is the here and now and the plan. And so both are going ahead in parallel. Obviously, they need to be talking to each other. And in answer to your specific question about what modelling have we done, so I think we had this discussion one other time with you. We don't use economic modelling in the way that our Treasury and economic colleagues do. We use a combination of industry intelligence and the data that we gather from our programs. I think coming up with a set of assumptions that will allow us to model that is incredibly difficult, because as we've been talking about, so I think you had Canberra Airport give evidence yesterday afternoon that they're at about 40%. We know that some places are ironically going gangbusters. Some of the fly-in, fly-out intrastate stuff in WA and Queensland in particular are actually seeing record numbers of activity and passengers and flights. Ballina is another one. So it's the unevenness of the impact. What I can say to you is we do not have what we think is a confident data set that we could predict would happen to our RANs and DANs networks. We have a guess, we have an intuitive feel based on everything that we've seen over the last few months, and that if the vaccine rollout continues to go well, we would expect to see a steady improve on RANs and DANs.
Stacey, I just come in there. When did the government announce or, approach the department to start the work on the towards 2021?
Middle of last year.
Middle to late last year, I would have thought.
Okay,
Yep.
middle
Yeah.
to late, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that if we can get this enduring domestic travel bubble, I think that we would expect to see, 40, 50, 60, going up to 70, 80% of movement. There will absolutely be a group of people who are very reluctant to travel for their own personal reasons, and that's fine. But I think there is a lot of pent-up demand out there, and if people have confidence that they won't get locked out of their home state or they won't, be doing anything that undermines public health directions, then I think you will see that. In an outcome sense, the way our programs are designed, they taper out as commercial activity returns of its own volition. That was that flex I was talking to you about. So we could do an absolute worst case scenario where everything falls apart again and we go back to where we were last April, or we could do a wildly optimistic scenario where we're back to 100% domestic activity. I think the truth is somewhere in between, and I think it won't be even on the way through, and I think that that's the difficulty.
So just going to that point, the department's currently exploring, obviously, the 29th of March to avert what could be a catastrophe for the industry if there was not support continuing on in aviation. And of course, you've been tracking, as you've been rightly saying, and as we would expect, the department's been tracking the inquiry. And also, I gather the general aviation inquiry as well, which is, there's some overlap issues that have been raised.
There are.
There's been a lot of ideas that have been expressed. Have you collated those ideas, and are you investigating further some of the concepts that have been put forward? And
Yes, we are.
so have you considered what that support might look like for different organisations, and what are those considerations that have been weighed up?
So, Senator, we're tracking all of the inquiries, in addition to being part of the dialogue that's going on through the 5-year plan. Aviation's a big, diverse sector. What works for a small RPT operator versus what works for a large RPT operator versus what works for a flying school in regional Australia versus what works for charters, and charters are everything from alliance to, very small one-offs. So, there are a lot of ideas on the table, and it's our job to sift through them and shape up our advice to government. And we are conscious, Senator, of exactly what you said before about giving people as much notice and certainty as we can. There are real lives on the line here. There are real people and real communities. We think that the current range of programs have done a pretty good job of flexing through the ups and downs of the crisis, but that's not to say there won't be other ideas that might be worth considering. The one thing I can guarantee you is that no matter what gets decided by when and by who, someone will be disappointed if they don't see their particular idea that they have shaped up quite rationally from their point of view as being the thing they need. We will never please everyone, but we are trying very hard to capture as much of the sector as we can.
I'm not reflecting this on the department, but this is 3.5 weeks before that cliff is not very long. And I just raised that there's been a number, and I'm not asking you to make particular comments about JobKeeper. Obviously, that's not in your bailiwick, but it is about support to the industries that you have, the department has engagement with, where organisations like Donata, airports owned by local government, essential aviation workers who can't afford to upgrade their skills, as a result of not receiving support elsewhere within government, they're saying they're particularly vulnerable as well. Is there consideration, and is there a desire to deal with that, as you say, unevenness of support and results?
I won't comment, but all I can say to you is those views have certainly been put to us and to the decision makers inside government.
So I might sort of go to the question of, I'll withdraw that, I'll do something else. In conversations with the industry, there's been concern raised about the industry risks permanently losing skilled and experienced workers, and we touched on this a bit earlier this morning. Is there, what's the department's, not yours, but the department's concerns if we lose those skill sets, and has there a projection about skill sets that would be lost if there wasn't assistance?
So I think we understand the notion that there are a range of different jobs in this sector, some which are don't have particular specialist skills, and some that are deeply and highly specialised, and that we understand that in order to have any restart happen in any sensible way, methodical way, that you need to have the right number of people with currency and skills that you need. I suspect that the alignment of that will be really challenging for us and for all of the operators in the sector, but it is certainly one of our key areas of policy focus.
So I'm mindful that the skill sets we've heard about STEM skills, and we heard about obviously with pilots and flight attendants, which have obvious licensing. We heard evidence regarding engineers yesterday, and about the 5-year plan. I'm going to be very interested about that aspect of it, but also the immediacy of keeping people interested in staying in the industry so they can build their skill sets up.
Yeah.
One piece of evidence, where one fellow had been working as a non-licensed engineer since he was 16, and became a licensed engineer when he was 30 after doing 150 exams. I'm not suggesting he shouldn't have done those exams. I'm not sure if he passed every one of them initially, but he certainly said there was a lot of study involved. It was 150 actually.
Was it?
Yeah. That's what he said.
And 49 more than I do.
Well, that's probably, goes for both of us, Chair. I think one of the things that's clear also is that evidence was given about what might be considered as semi-skilled or unskilled positions that also require a lot of experience to be able to carry out efficiently. And if I was to break it down to the least skilled, to replace somebody at an airport, that requires 15 days ASIC test. That's if it goes as quickly as possible, which is, as we know, the minimum requirement to be operating permanently on the airport. And that's a national security issue to make sure that those checks are done. It's a national criminal checks that should be done as well before people are access the airport. They're very critical assessments. And of course we received evidence that sometimes that takes up to 3 months for ASICs to be passed. I would expect that that there's going to be a lot of pressure as we flex up and down. So keeping people connected, it's not just what would be considered as engineers and pilots, which are critical, STEM workers, which are critical, and many others, but also what we might otherwise be considered as less skilled or low skilled areas that are critical for success of the airport. Has that been taken into consideration as well?
Yes, Senator, it has.
And in light of those pressures, and in 3.5 weeks, many of those workers, again, I'm mindful the department's been doing a lot of work in this area, and consistently doing work in this area, but we're getting very close to the cliff. Some would argue that people have already, gone over it because they've left the industry, and as this uncertainty continues on, there's more and more concern. I'm sure you're aware that it isn't just downsizing due to COVID-19 creating the problems. As some airlines are outsourcing some of these roles, replacing workers with decades of experience with cheaper, younger workers and less secure employment. Is the department concerned about the trend of finding that there's less experienced workers coming into the industry to replace experience?
Senator, fundamentally, the airlines run the airlines. They have to satisfy the safety regulator that they are fit to fly, and that they have the workforces that are appropriate to get that level of certification. I know that the chief operating officers of the airlines work very closely with CASA the department fundamentally, cannot be running the airlines for them. The decisions they make have to be commercial decisions.
There's going to this point of the department, does the department have a concern that we lose a set of skills, we lose that experience, and they're being replaced by people that are unskilled and inexperienced? They might tick a box, but ticking a box and having that experience lost, we all know in any organisation, let alone any industry, has a massive impact. Is there a concern about the potential of that impact occurring, that we're having a cohort of inexperienced people coming in and losing valuable experience from the industry?
I think from an overall sector perspective, we understand that the workforce that sits behind a whole variety of organisations within it, everyone's workforce is different. Some people may have been going to retire anyway. Some people are starting out at any given time. There's a pipeline. I accept the general proposition that you are making, that some commercial decisions have been made. I'm not sure I can accept that leads you in a causal sense to less skilled people. They, by definition, some of them may have less years of experience, but I think the issue of skills is different to experience, and that's where we rely on our regulators to do their job.
Well, I'll just ask this question in a different way then. But it would seem to me that in a department, somebody who comes with the right accreditation, someone who's employed on the basis of a skill set they bring somewhere else, also will take some time to actually understand the workings of the department and the personalities within the department. And I don't mean that in an objectional way. I mean that as a human interaction way.
Yep.
How you best perform your duties and how you engage with the people around you. So it's back to my point. If we're having a drain of people with experience and we have a new group come in, it takes some additional time for that new group to be able to perform to their maximum, and sometimes, and particularly in intense areas, it can take many months and sometimes even years to get to their peak. Wouldn't that be correct? So if we were actually finding a lot of high turnover, then there's a question about whether we've got a skilled workforce but an experienced workforce that are at their peak.
So, Senator, one observation I would make is we don't know. I describe the sector and people's love of working in it as quite sticky. People actually want to stay in the sector. They love it. Well, at least certainly a proportion of them, do. Your example of someone who sat the exam, hopefully it's more than one exam, 150 times, but, they want to be in it. And so they might exit temporarily, they might come back, they might be prepared to find a second job while they're working a smaller amount of hours. So I think the drain that you are talking about is uncertain, but I have to accept at its surface that there will be some people, and some experienced people, who exit the sector. I think that is frankly an uncontroversial statement. What we don't know is what the mix of the new workforce is going to look like, and what we also don't know is how hard and fast we're going to rebound. So the sector will not go back to 100% on day one, and there will be opportunities to grow that new bucket of experience, I guess, for want of a better word. And the only other thing I can kind of add is I don't know of any employer that wants to have a transfer of experienced, skilled people in with a transfer of inexperienced, skilled people. They're operating.
Qantas have shown that by sacking 2,500 ground handlers.
I can't speak to what.
Oh no, I'm just saying. You said you couldn't see. There's a live example.
But every operator has to have a workforce that allows them to run their business.
No, but Ms. Stacey, I'm not going to get into a blue. I'm happy to get into a blue with you, but
No,
we don't
please
need
not.
to. Okay, there's a classic live example, 2,500 Qantas employees, given the goodbye and replaced by inexperienced people. It's live.
Okay.
I'm not making it up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just moving to a slightly different, there's a Australian International Pilots Association said this in the submission. Policy approaches that directly provide support to employers and training institutions in the belief that the pilot asset will indirectly benefit on a pass-through basis are neither the most effective nor efficient way to preserve or create our national pilot asset base. Employers and institutions game the system to maximise cash flow and fee siphoning rather than maximising efficient training and capacity maintenance. So if the department is mindful of that statement, if the department is investigating a payment or subsidy tied to training and accreditation for skilled workers, do you agree that direct support for the workers themselves rather than employers would be the most efficient approach?
I can't comment. That's their perspective, and it goes back to the point I made earlier that we can design all sorts of things, and no one will ever be fully satisfied that it's the perfect solution for them.
There's 3 pilot unions that have all made the same similar, and I know they have very different leaderships, but they do have a common view, which is not always common amongst the 3 groups, and that is that analysis on the money being better tied to individuals for the training rather than tied to fee siphoning, as they described, commercial operations.
Yeah, I can't comment any further. I understand the point you're making.
Let's want to ask about the Regional Airlines Funding Assistance, or RRAT program. So how much money was available under this program, and can you just explain me briefly the program's purpose?
I might get Mr. Wood to take you through a bit of that, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly, Senator. So the Regional Airlines Funding Assistance Program, or RRAT, ran from April last year to the end of the calendar year. It was $100 million was available, and it was intended to provide, firstly, to ensure air connectivity was maintained for regional and remote communities for those airlines that were at the greatest risk of financial collapse. So essentially, the funding was for last resort funding for regional airlines, and it was targeted specifically for regional RPT airlines and smaller operators providing essential services to regional and remote Australia.
So small operators. So how much of the money of this $100 million has been allocated to date?
So funding of $73.6 million was agreed, but of that, only $70.6 million was paid.
So,
Because the remainder was not required. Went for a rigorous approach each month to check what had been requested and what was actually required.
So which organisations are the largest recipients of that grant, and how much have they received?
Yeah, Senator, there was, so this program was targeted for, as I say, for last resort funding, so there were only 13 grants executed, and we've of course discussed this at length in Senate estimates before, but Regional Express was the largest funding recipient, and I'll just check my notes for the number. So Regional Express was approved for $53.9 million, and of that, and that was fully paid. The next largest airline was Corporate Air, which now operates as Link Airlines, and they were approved for $7.3 million, of which $6 million was paid.
So Rex received roughly $54 million, and there's been some substantially smaller sums to other airlines.
Yes, of course, but they are also substantially smaller airlines in their coverage and size.
And Virgin and Qantas were ineligible for that grant?
That's correct. This was targeted at regional airlines.
Virgin advised the committee in response to a question on notice from our 29th January hearing that in 2019, it scheduled more than 25,000 daily seats to regional ports compared to 6,700 for Rex. Is the department aware of both Virgin and Qantas have significantly larger regional flight capacity than Rex?
Senator, can I just explain to you, when, you know how we were talking at the beginning about the domestic activity grinding to a halt about Easter last year? That's when we first set up DANS, which was, in theory, about the major trunk routes. We put Qantas and Virgin, including their regional routes, in the first DANS bucket. That's why they were excluded from RAFA. And then we flipped that on the 30th of June to make it a much cleaner trunk routes, regional routes. So Qantas and Virgin were ineligible in the first round of the regional supports because they were being supported through DANS, and then that normalised over the course of the year.
So I just want to go to this case. When the department was designing the program, there were two main regional operators ineligible for grants, yet Rex was not ineligible. It was only eligible, but in fact received more than half the overall package itself. Is that correct? In actual fact, it's more than half. Was it 50, close to 54, and was 70? How much did you say has actually been handed out?
Rex received $54 million, which is actually proportionate to the size of that airline amongst the regional operators, excluding Virgin and Qantas, who, as you've noted, do have a significant regional presence, or did in the case of Virgin. That's been reduced, obviously, although they still operate to a wide range of larger regional centres.
So from the department's own materials, and from your comments this morning, if I've got it correctly, that and you quoted this word, and it's in the material, the last resort. I understand that's been your expressed consistent approach. Does it mean the grant can only be available to airlines who are on the verge of insolvency?
Insolvency is a word I wouldn't specifically use because it can have a technical meaning under the Corporations Act. I wouldn't want to claim expertise on that at this point. It is certainly something that we did went to great lengths to explore the cash flow of those airlines, had much greater access to their financial records than you would typically ever expect to see, and we also got independent advice in relation to that. So yes, it was clearly required, and there was an imminent risk in all of those cases that the airlines would cease operations.
Particularly because they were servicing the smaller markets, and so this was one of those measures that was designed to just effectively try and preserve the broad structure of the regional market from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. It was designed to just put a floor under airlines that, you know, we knew would have no capacity to absorb that shutdown of activity in regional Australia.
Just want to draw this out. I'm just mindful of the time. So presumably the department had been satisfied before awarding the 54 million thereabouts to Rex, that the airline would be in serious financial difficulty if they were not receiving that support for those routes.
To be clear, Senator, this was not a program that was based on supporting specific routes. There was a separate initiative, a the RANS program supported on a route basis. This was about keeping their core cash flow to enable the company to exist. And to be clear, Senator, as well, we did do a rigorous assessment of that, and indeed in many instances airlines sought significantly greater amounts of funding than they were ultimately awarded.
And we also got external advice from accountancy firms. So we were going through their claims line by line and through their books, which they had to open up to us. And we also engaged the services of a specialist accountancy firm to make sure that we had the forensic accountancy lens on it as well.
So in the department, is the department aware that excluding the $54 million RAFA grant, REX recorded in its annual report for the 2020 financial year an increase in revenue of $4 million and an underlying profit excluding non-cash asset impairment of $250,000?
We are aware that REX's activity base shifted, and we're certainly aware that they've made public disclosures of their earnings. There are a very specific set of circumstances about the way REX run their business. They largely run a cash business, which meant that their cash reserves were close to zero, which is on the basis, and was on that basis that we went into their books and entered into this program, into this grant program with them. So, yes.
I think, Mr. Sharp, I can be corrected, but certainly said words to the effect that we're certainly the only airline in Australia, and he hazarded to guess the world, that's actually turned a profit during this period. Of course, $38 million of that, of the $54 million, was in that financial year provided by the department. I just want to confirm the last resort grant program for regional airlines did not provide any money to Virgin, which was a major regional operator, of course, even as it went into administration, but gave, and we saw that $54 million was given to a smaller regional company, which at the time was running as a profit.
As we indicated to you, Senator, Qantas and Virgin were being supported through the DANS program at that time. They were not eligible.
I just want to make this point that the financials, as you said, it's more broadly, wasn't dedicated to specific routes. It was, as Mr. Wood just correctly described, it was about looking at the financial difficulties that the companies were in. And a major regional operator, Virgin, was in extreme difficulties and facing potential closure. And yet there wasn't a lifeline handed out to them, but it was to REX.
I think the issue of what decisions was made about Virgin and the state of Virgin, were well traversed at the time that went into administration. The government made the decision that it made. It has come out of administration successfully, and we are working incredibly hard with all of the airlines to make sure that they can continue to operate and recover and thrive.
I'm not questioning the department's dedication, actually far from it. But we have a circumstance where there's companies receiving untied grants based on the financial difficulties and other companies not. And both companies operating in regional services, and one of those companies providing substantially more seating. I appreciate there's they also operate in various parts of the regional market, but substantially larger operation based on how the department correlates regional work. Did REX provide a submission or any input, or did any discussions take place where REX advised on how the program should be designed and administered?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
Senator, I think after the program was announced and we were in the process of assessing applications, I'm sure REX expressed views at that time, but that the program guidelines were already in existence at that point.
Are you aware that if that there was any discussions from the ministerial office? Are you aware that any discussions took place prior to?
Not to my knowledge, Senator. As Mr. Wood said, once it was up and running, pretty much every airline gave us the benefit of their views about what should be eligible. But in terms of the program design, no.
I think, Senator, and you would recall at the time things were moving very quickly. Airlines, REX and others were quite public in their views that in the absence of government support they would cease operations. That was immediately prior to the decision for this program to be implemented.
And I note that REX has 5 routes that they've no longer operating in, and have again expressed their concerns if there isn't further support beyond the end of March, that further routes would be likely to be discontinued.
So I think my understanding of their statement was that they are still in them, but they had indicated they would cease if RANs ceased. That was how I read their statement to be, and we are very aware of that.
We heard also from Rex's Deputy Chairman, John Sharp, yesterday, insisted the grants were not untied money, but were subject to strict terms, and I'm talking about RAFA,
Yep.
strict terms and conditions about what the grants could be allocated for and how they could be spent. How much in total did Rex initially request, including expenses or requests that were rejected by the department?
Senator, I don't have the breakdown at that level of detail because this occurred iteratively over a number of processes, over a number of months. Essentially, each month in the first month we made an initial assessment, but the funding was changed on at least one occasion subsequently. However, I can tell you that Rex in total sought $104.7 million, of which $53.9 million was approved.
Is it possible to get those figures for the breakdown for the monthly on the basis of that? Is it not right now, but if
we
it's
can
for the
provide
notice?
that on notice, I believe.
Yeah.
With,
And we'll probably just clump them into activities, or, I don't particularly want to have to send my staff going through hundreds of lines again, because it was hundreds of lines. So if you're happy for us to try and group things up together.
I'm fine with that, thank
Thanks.
you. Yeah, thank you. Was Rex effectively given an opportunity to provide a shopping list to the department for what it wanted and how much it would cost?
No, they weren't, no.
So what was the parameters of that were required of anyone making a submission for monies?
Senator, there are grant guidelines which are of course published, which set out those details, but essentially the overriding factor is they need to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the department that they had a need for cash flow to support to continue operating, and that they had taken all reasonable steps to either seek alternative funding or also receiving JobKeeper and any other alternative sources of funding that were open to the broader economy, and we made an assessment on that basis.
Mr. Wood, I'm not tripping up on this. I just want to make sure that you said competing and operating, or was it just a slip of the tongue? I'm not quite sure.
I think it was
Was
just
that the
because I
consideration?
was listening as well,
yeah.
is operating.
Yeah.
Operating, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Wood.
And just to confirm
Yeah.
for the committee, all decisions about what was eligible and what would be paid were made inside the department. It was purely an administrative
That's right.
program, and the decision makers were departmental officers.
That took away my question then.
I've got no further questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Senator Sheldon. So, Ms Stacey and the officials, thank you very much. We'll see you
In 2
couple of weeks, won't we?
Yeah.